All right.
Great. Great. Well, as you heard, we're recording. So, welcome all. We've hit 1 p.m. So, we'll go ahead and get started. We're still working on a little bit of a tech issue on the live stream right now, but hopefully that will be up and running in a few moments. But first, I just want to say hello and welcome everyone. We're really glad that you can join us at today's October Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting for Puget Sound Energy. I am Annie Kilberg-Smith with Triangle Associates, and I'm going to be facilitating today's meeting. We are excited to have you here and really just taking time out of your day. We know everyone's really busy and that this is a busy time of year, just professionally, personally, all the things. So thank you for doing that. As I mentioned before, just a reminder, we are recording today's meeting and that will be posted on YouTube. You can find that on the RPAG website under the Puget Sound Energy website, and we can post some links in the chat as needed. We would also just like to request, if possible, I know people are probably still finishing lunch, but if you do want to turn your cameras on, if you're an RPAG member, that's always a very welcome. We've heard from folks, it'd be great to have the members be able to get to know each other a little bit better. And I think that's a good place to start. So we're just going to request that if possible. You can go to the next slide. All right, so this is just a few facilitator requests just to try to help keep things going smoothly and help keep everything running nice and respectfully. So first of all, we're just going to try to keep the conversation as constructive as possible. I'll help guide us through each of the pieces of the agenda and help coordinate who is speaking when, but just respecting that role and let me just guide the process. I know we've been doing that so far and it's been working really well. Another piece is just avoiding the use of acronyms as much as you can, and maybe using them after you've at least explained them once is okay. And then just explaining technical questions. If they're super technical, we have some members that are newer to the group, and it's always good to break them down a little bit so that the jargon is put aside for a moment. We also have a feedback form that you can provide feedback to PSE with. We will post that in the chat, or you can email them at isp@pse.com for additional input. And then we want to just ask that everyone try to stay focused on the webinar topic, which we'll get to in a sec. And we will also be taking public comments after we wrap up the main presentations and Q&A, and those will be taken from public participants. So if you'd like to do that today, just a heads up that will be towards the end of the meeting. And then I was going to do just a quick reminder on your Zoom controls, because I know they're always making updates and it's hard to keep up. So if you have a question, you can go to your reactions and click on hand raise. You see that there's a lot of emojis there, but you can click the hand raise right above the emojis, and that will go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll see who raised their hand first. We'll get you in the queue and I'll call your name. You can also put your questions in the chat, or if you are only calling in, feel free to take yourself off mute and say, hey, this is Annie, I have a question. And then as a reminder on the chat function, this is not something we can change. It is just something Zoom has consistently done, and they haven't changed their protocols yet, but just a reminder to please go ahead. There's a blue drop-down box on the chat, and if you could select everyone rather than hosts and panelists, that way your chat will go to everyone, including public participants. If you have a direct message about technical support or you're having troubles with Zoom, you can just direct message myself or my colleague, Bernardo Relampagos, and he's online as well. Okay, next slide, which is going to be the safety moment. All right, so for today's safety moment, it's focused on driving in the rain. I think we've entered the sloppy, rainy part of the fall season. We went from beautiful fall sunny days to this rainy piece quite quickly, but just 5 key things. I won't read all of these, but 5 key things. There's 2 on the back, which is just short for, if you can only afford to replace 2 of your tires, go ahead and do them on the back. I'm not a car expert, but I'm told that helps you have better traction. If your car is feeling a little bit out of touch in terms of being a little slippery or hydroplaning, your tires might be low tread. So, you might want to just reduce your speed. And if you're losing speed, just go ahead and ease off on the gas and reduce the speed. That helps also with avoiding hydroplaning. And then I'll read off one more, being cautious from the start. So there's a lot of grime and dust from the last several months of no rain on the road. So when you kick off that first drive in the rain, please just be slow to do so, and don't go full gas to the bottom of your car, and just go ahead and stay as slow as you can so that you can make sure to be as safe as you can. Okay, next slide. So we've got just a couple folks today that are going to be speaking on the topic. So we've got Brian Tyson, Manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation at Puget Sound Energy. And then we've got Uche Nuede, who is the Energy Equity Initiatives Manager at Puget Sound Energy. So I want to welcome you both. Big thanks to both of you for sharing your time and expertise with us. And then in addition to our speakers, we also have several PSE colleagues and RPAG members here today. And what I'm going to ask of all the RPAG members, if you don't mind just renaming yourself with your affiliation behind your name, that's really helpful for us. Especially for PSE folks that haven't been to many RPAG meetings in the past, or if you're new to the group. And then also, I'd love to see if you could just introduce yourselves in the chat. We've been doing this a bit over the last few months, and it's been nice to see. So just in the chat, go ahead and put your name, your affiliation in terms of who you represent, and what we're looking forward to hearing about in the agenda today. We'd love to see that in the chat, just waterfall in. Okay, next slide. And Ben, if you don't mind I know you're busy with the YouTube, but if you don't mind putting that prompt in the chat so people see that, that'd be great. Okay, so here's our agenda today. It's broken down by two main presentations with a break, and then we move to public comment before we adjourn by 3. We're going to be focusing on equity and system planning and equity considerations and resource planning. So as I mentioned, we'll have a break. We might need to be flexible on what time that occurs, just based on how many questions we are. But of course, at the end, we'll be providing that space for public comment and try to get out of here no later than 3. Next slide. So in terms of the meeting purpose, we're really starting by grounding today's discussion in where PSE has been, reviewing how they have integrated equity considerations and engagement into the past system planning cycles. This context really helps us see how approaches have evolved over time and where there are some opportunities to strengthen or expand them moving forward. And then we're going to be looking ahead to the 2027 ISP and discuss how equity can be more intentionally reflected in both planning assumptions and modeling work. And then we will revisit some key themes and recommendations from the Equity Advisory Group's October 20th discussion. So we're hoping that this reflection will help confirm where there's alignment, identity, any areas that might need further exploration or clarification before the next phase of the ISP process. You can go to the next slide. And then in terms of what we want to hear from you in terms of your reactions and insights as we move through today's topics, would just be helpful to help PSE, refine how equity is incorporated across the ISP process, hearing your reflections, your insight, input, et cetera, and how they're addressing the issues in your mind. And then please don't hesitate to flag any gaps, confusing language, or areas that you might need some more context. We know that this might be new information to some people, and happy to break it down as needed. Try and just make it as clear as possible for as many of you as we can. And then I think we can, in terms of just like highlighting any risks or tensions or points of misalignment early, if there are some things that you're seeing where there's some misalignment of perspectives, I think please just you can flag it for us. You can name it, just surfacing that early really helps us all build some understanding and perspective and look for proactive solutions. Okay, do you have any questions? Folks have any questions about anything that I just covered before we dive into the juicy topics today? Great, and I'm seeing everyone introduce themselves in the chat. So And just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, please choose the drop down in the chat that says there's a blue box and it might say hosts and panelists right now. If you can click on it and choose everyone, that way the public can also see your messages as well. I see some people are doing that, so thank you. And some people probably didn't know that was there or haven't seen it before. But just a few folks I'll call out. I see Callie, Megan, Katie, Donald, Eliza, Dan, Kelly. Welcome everyone, and thanks so much for being here. Okay, well, as those names keep flooding in, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so this is where I'm going to hand it off to cover the history of equity and system planning to Brian Tyson and Uche Nuade. So off to you two.
Great. Thank you, Annie. And good to see you all RPAG members on this afternoon. I think it's been some time since I've been back and Uche's been back to talk to you all. But today, as Annie mentioned, we want to talk about equity considerations in the integrated system planning process. I do want to make a note that today's discussion is focused on the modeling and analysis portion of the integrated system plan. And we have a slide later to show how that may evolve over time. But just want us to all be in that frame of reference that we're really thinking about the models themselves and the analysis that's going on within those models. As Annie mentioned, there's a number of technical PSE people on the call here just to support any questions or discussion we have later on. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So what Uche and I want to do is first just talk about the history, the engagement, how equity requirements have transitioned over time. I want to give you really a overview of how we're considering equity in the modeling and analysis, and we have a number of pictures to show that. And then we want to get a little bit into the details of how each of the different planning teams are considering equity in their specific model or analysis that they're performing as well. And we'll get to that later on after the break here. But first, I want to start with something Dennis will be familiar with. If we go to the next slide, one of the key advisory groups we know we need to talk to is the Equity Advisory Group. And so this is to let you all know, we talked to the Equity Advisory Group last week about these same topics. We gave the overview of equity considerations. We discussed a bit of the application of energy equity tenants. And so we're here to reflect that with you as RPAG members as well. But as I mentioned, we want to get a little bit deeper into the technical aspects of the equity considerations as well. So know that we have talked to the EAG about this particular topic in the past. Okay, next slide, please. So Uche is going to start us off here and just talk about some of the history of equity requirements.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here presenting to you today. So this slide kind of provides a high-level overview of how equity requirements have evolved within PS's system planning, and it also highlights a few key milestones we have achieved along the way. And so as you see here, before 2019, PS's planning was primarily driven by a least cost portfolio approach with no formal equity requirements in place. But that changed with the passage of CETA, that is the Clean Energy Transformation Act. The CETA modified the least cost portfolio approach, requiring electric utilities to ensure the equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens for customers. So building on CETA, that is the Clean Energy Transformation Act. I'm trying to be careful with the acronym. So building on CETA, PSE filed its first Clean Energy Implementation Plan, which is our CEIP, in 2021. And at the heart of this plan were two key innovations: the identification and mapping of named communities, which consists of our highly impacted communities and our vulnerable populations, and also the development of our customer benefit indicators, our CBIs. And these are to measure progress towards equitable outcomes. And so in 2022, the Commission referenced the energy justice framework in the Cascade natural gas rate case. And since then, PSC has adopted this framework to guide how we consider equity and also operationalize equity across our planning processes. By 2023, PSE filed its first gas integrated resource plan, an electric progress report, using a portfolio benefit analysis to inform the selection of our preferred electric portfolio. And that same year our 2021 CIP was formally approved with conditions setting 30% minimum designation of energy benefits across our resource groups or tranches for named communities. We also filed our biennial CIP update, documenting our progress towards our clean energy goals and our equity commitments. And then in 2024, the biennial update was approved with new conditions requiring PSC to identify and prioritize customers in deepest need for the distribution of energy benefits. And so later that year, House Bill 1589 was passed, authorizing the creation of the Integrated System Plan, which is the ISP. And this plan merges both the Integrated Resource Plan and the Clean Energy Implementation Plan, energy requirements, as well as equity considerations into a single integrated document. And then, as we see most recently in 2025, the House Bill 1589 rulemaking was finalized, and this introduced other, I would say, new planning considerations, including a customer cost test and societal impacts. So this has just kind of illustrated like the evolution of the equity requirements, and the key milestones that I kind of mentioned all demonstrates both our progress and our commitment to meeting legislative mandates and the regulatory requirements. And they also kind of lay the foundation for our integrated system planning work today, which we're going to like kind of walk you through, especially the initial phase where we have the modeling and analysis. Please, can you go to the next slide? All right. Thank you. So this slide outlines PS's history of equity engagement in our system planning. And so throughout our system, throughout our efforts, PSC has consistently engaged with the Resource Planning Advisory Group, the RPAG, the Equity Advisory Group, the EAG, and the broader public. And this kind of shows those touch points where we've had like real strategic engagement and collaborations. And this has taken so many forms, including public drop-in sessions that were focused on portfolio benefit analysis, helping us quantify those equity-related impacts across our resource portfolios. We've also had collaborative discussions on equity in both the delivery system planning and the integrated resource planning. Our engagement efforts have also included like those customer-focused initiatives that we had with like the engagement and the empowerment pilot within distributed energy resource programs. And those initiatives were primarily designed to elevate our customer voices and better understand their priorities, especially as we design our programs. And if you recall, we've had the joint work sessions with advisory groups, including the RPAG and other key interested parties and advisory groups like the EAG as well, to define deepest need, ensuring that we have that shared understanding and alignment in who our deepest need customers are. And so as we transition to the 2027 ISP, we definitely will continue to maintain this active engagement with our advisory group members and other interested parties, ensuring that equity remains central to our planning efforts. And I would like to add that these ongoing conversations we've had and the feedback we have received have been really instrumental in shaping how equity is both understood, prioritized, and also applied across our planning processes. We can go to the next slide. We have someone's hand is up. Okay.
Yes.
Hi. Hey, Uche, Quinn Weber with Washington UTC. If you could go back a slide, please. I'm curious about how PSE plans to integrate the customer preference survey into its equity framework.
Yeah, Quinn, I can Which I can take that one. Quinn, thanks for that question. I think we're still working behind the scenes to figure out where the best way to really use the insight we gain from the survey to use in the ISP. So we're still working through that to really understand where it can be fully integrated.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Thanks for that question, Quinn. Other questions, folks, so far? Okay. I don't see any in the chat either. So feel free to keep going if that's Brian or Uche.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. And so this slide, I think Brian already mentioned this earlier, presents a visual of PSE's ISP equity pathway, and it highlights those key phases where equity is considered, what we refer to as the equity checkpoints. And as you can see on this slide, there are three primary checkpoints in the ISP process: the modeling and analysis phase, the decision framework, and the outcomes and actions. But today, and what we're really here for, is the modeling and analysis phase to show how we have considered equity at this phase. And so where we are today, which is the modeling and analysis phase, is really where equity begins to be integrated in the entire planning process. So at this phase, equity considerations, and I think as Brian mentioned earlier, are really high level, very conceptual, and largely based on assumptions and forecasts. And it's like kind of devoid of those community-specific impacts, but basically on assumptions and those forecasts. And Brian will walk us through this phase in detail shortly. But as we move along this ISP pathway, equity becomes more nuanced and actionable. And for example, at the decision framework stage, equity is shaped by those regulatory requirements and guiding principles that reflect broader societal values. And as you move further along at the outcomes and action checkpoints, equity is reflected in PS's historical and ongoing programmatic efforts. And at this phase, we can say that equity kind of moves from concept to implementation through specific actions and measurable outcomes. And equity, at this phase kind of drives how programs are designed, distributed, and evaluated. And the main highlight of this slide is that our ability to influence the equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens, which is the core of equity, kind of strengthens as we progress through each checkpoint. And so the deeper we go, from phase to phase, the more actionable and the more community informed our efforts become. And I think I can stop here and take any questions, if any, before I move on to the next slide. So we have someone's hand.
Yes, thanks. Quinn.
Oh, I moved my computer down. Try to unmute myself, but I'm curious about a couple things. So I'm seeing that today is October of 2025, and so you're saying that the next time that this group will hear anything about equity is more or less like a year from now?
Yeah, so Quinn, to that point, this is actually spot on, Quinn, because we heard a similar concern from the EAG when we talked to them last week. Really, this is just to map out where we plan to sort of um, come together on decision framework. It doesn't mean that that is the only instance. In fact, there may be other instances that happen throughout the process, but for us, it's to really understand, okay, when do we need to have that discussion as it relates to our full modeling, our full ISP schedule? And then when do we want to talk about outcomes and actions as it relates to our full schedule? But it does not mean that we are waiting until Q3 to have that sort of discussion on the decision framework. That's not the intent here.
Okay, I have more questions, but I'll let Dennis jump in.
Hey, Dennis, question?
Actually, kind of a reflection from the EAG meeting on the 20th. When we look at the modeling and analysis, one of the things that EAG is looking at, and again, we've had these discussions in detail with Brian, is really to identify in the modeling analysis portion the opportunities within the four tenets, in particular, recognition, procedural, and distribution quadrants. So that modeling analysis will start to look at those three of four quadrants there. And I'm not going to go into much detail, but the decision-making framework, and we're collaborative. We're looking at an equity evaluation model to go along with the decision-making framework. And I think that these are the early stages. And that model essentially would be structured, consistently applied evaluation model to assess programs, projects, policies, and actions as we go forward. So again, at the very early stages, but these will be the things that will be baked in as we move forward in the process. So, Brian, did you want to add anything there? Or?
No, no, Dennis, actually, it's funny. We actually had a opportunity for you to sort of talk more about what you heard and what you experienced in EAG. So this was really helpful, Dennis. And I agree. It's having those four tenets, and I think Uche is going to touch on it on the next slide, but having those four tenets as a framework to use in each of these different, what I would call checkpoints, but each of these different gates, especially the decision framework and outcomes and actions, and being able to use that as we go throughout the ISP process. So thank you, Dennis. I think that was well described there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Quinn, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually my point goes well with Dennis's, which is that like yes, PSE is developing a equity framework, and obviously now the rules have changed, but the 2025 ISP had a developed equity framework that was being implemented within the plan. Where does that stand? Is that just getting all thrown out the window, or is that going to be iterated on? Or I didn't see it in any of the presentation materials this week.
Right. And so, Quinn, when you said 25 IRP,
yeah, the 25 IRP. Yeah.
Okay, and I believe you're referring to the portfolio benefit analysis that we had done before. Yeah, what we're trying to do now is I don't think we're losing the work that was done in that portfolio benefit analysis, but I think what we've seen is that there are really, and you'll see this later in the presentation, that there are really certain aspects of each planning, each model that can really dive deeper into those attributes. And so we may not be able to understand jobs from the gas and electric supply, but we will be able to understand emissions and portfolio costs. And so what we're trying to do is be really specific and mindful of which models can actually provide some information, as opposed to sort of trying to um, use the list of CBIs, if you will, and try to mesh it with what the existing analysis is showing us. So I think we're being more tactical and more diligent about understanding which models can provide which values.
Got it. And will this be so this will be more of like a post hoc equity analysis, given that a lot of things that you're modeling right now or the inputs are at least locked in. Is that right?
So say that phrase again. You said post
hoc. So like you're going to do the analysis on the profiles, and then at some point you'll come back to us with results about what the equity impacts are of what you modeled. Is that right?
I wouldn't quite frame it that way, Quinn. What I would say is at each of these different checkpoints, we're able to understand equity considerations at a different level. So the level at the modeling side is there's a lot of generic resources. It's a lot of forecasting. We don't really understand the customer impacts, but as we move along, we actually have a better understanding of how these actions or how this analysis may impact customers. So what we want to present here is, given where we are with the model, this is where we are able to understand impacts. It doesn't mean that's the only place. We'll understand the impacts of the decision framework. That'll be another layer, if you will. We'll do the same thing sort of in the outcomes and actions as well. And so each checkpoint will sort of give us a different lens of how equity is considered and the magnitude of how those benefits are distributed. Does that help, Quinn?
Yeah, I think so. I'll have a lot more questions going forward.
Sure,
Don't worry.
sure. And hopefully when we get through the sort of specific teams, that'll also help as well.
And hey, Dennis, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just to kind of support what Brian's saying, in the discussions again with the EAG, we're looking at, a model, a dynamic model that can be used at multiple stages based on the kinds of information that are present. And again, it's designed to be consistent, and it's designed also to be able to raise issues and provide opportunities for changes with the ISP and other mechanisms as we go through. So it's kind of obviously a system that is pre, during, and even after analysis. So it's designed to be kind of an organic part of this process that assesses not only qualitative but also quantitative measures as we go through. Sound good, Brian?
Thank you for that, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis and Quinn, for questions and add-on information. Very helpful. Okay. Any other questions before we keep moving? I don't see any, so please feel free to keep going.
Okay. Yeah. Um, sorry. This slide illustrates how PSE conceptualizes and operationalizes equity. And thank you so much, Dennis, for kind of touching on this. And so our approach is grounded in the energy justice framework from the University of Michigan, which was also referenced by the Commission in the Cascade order. And so this framework provides a consistent lens for conceptualizing and applying equity across all phases of the ISP. And as we go, like in the next slide, Brian is going to kind of touch on how some of these tenets kind of play within the modeling and analysis phase. And so with the recognition tenets, this involves identifying and mapping and continuously deepening our understanding of those historical and current disparities. And this includes our ongoing efforts to understand and respond to the needs of our named communities and our customers in deepest need. So the procedural piece ensures that these communities that we prioritize are actively involved in those decisions that affect them. And this happens through our ongoing outreach and engagement efforts with customers, advisory groups, community-based organizations, our tribal communities, and other key interested parties. And then with the distributional tenets, we continuously prioritize our named communities and deepest need customers for the distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens across all our programs, our services, and our products as well. And the restorative piece just ensures that we are very proactive and deliberate about implementing strategies and policies to mitigate those disparities, and with the aim of advancing like the procedural and distributional equity, especially with our named committees and our deepest need customers also in mind. And so as Dennis kind of mentioned, these four tenets, help us to consistently increase our efforts to not just consider equity, but also actively integrate equity into our long-term system planning. And as we go on, we'll continue to utilize these tenets at the different phases. And like I said, Brian is going to walk us through the first phase, the modeling analysis phase, and how these tenets kind of play a role within that phase. I'll now hand over to Brian to take on from here and walk through the next phase in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Uche. So let's go to the next slide. As Uche mentioned, we want to take, again, this framework of the four tenets that's sort of been core to what we've been discussing, as Dennis had mentioned, and we want to apply it to the modeling and analysis. Again, we're thinking about equity considerations in the ISP modeling and analysis. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk through three of the tenets, recognition, procedural, and distributional, and how they are applied in the modeling analysis for each of the different teams here. And this we think is this is how we can reflect how equity considerations are being made in this at this portion of the ISP. Okay, Jack, click once. And I believe the first one is going to be the recognition side. So here you can see how we're considering recognition in some of the modeling teams, where in transmission or really in the planning, distribution planning, we're able to understand specific communities with a overlay of our energy systems mapping. And so that's really just seeing where communities lie as it relates to our system as a whole. And then on the customer strategy side, we're able to understand some of the disparities and recognize some of those customers, those specific customer segments, whether it be known low income or income eligible. We're able to just understand and recognize there is a specific group of customers that may be income eligible, and we need to think about that as we sort of develop some of the models and some of the plans later on. And the transmission is similar on the distribution, where we're able to understand, of course, name communities across our service territory. Okay, let's click once to get into the distributional. Now we'll start here with the demand forecast. And the reason we start here is because the demand forecast really sets a foundational, sort of a baseline for each of the different teams, meaning each team takes that demand forecast and use it within their own modeling and analysis. And where we see distributional equity come is from the temperature impacts from climate change. So when we do our load forecast, we understand, or we're able to model rather, the temperature impacts from climate change. And so seeing those different impacts, again, will be reflected in the forecast that each of the different teams will use as their underlying data. Okay, one more click, Jack. Use the customer side. So on the customer side, there's a number of different buckets here that we're considering on the customer side. The first is non-energy impacts. And so within the analysis or optimization of some of the energy efficiency programming, we also take into consideration non-energy impacts. Could be things related to public health or air quality, or a number of different areas like that. But those metrics, if you will, are considered as part of developing some of the energy efficiency savings, potential savings. Another piece I would call out is, again, we recognize that different customers may have different levels of income or different disparities. And so we're also able to understand a level of incentives or assistance that may be needed. Again, we're just forecasting here. We're not showing a specific number of where these incentives may go, but because we recognize that there are customers out there who may need incentives, we have captured that within some of the modeling here. Now, the last two are just cost effectiveness, which is something we always have to do in our portfolio planning. And then the fourth one you see there is the pilot DEA, the distributional equity analysis. So right now, PSE is undergoing some of that pilot project, and we hope to lean on some of the learnings from that DEA to use in the integrated system plan. Okay, Jack, we can go to the next one. Okay, the gas supply and electric supply. So this sort of goes back to a question, Quinn, you had brought up about the portfolio benefit analysis. Again, what we're trying to show here is that we know that there are some specific areas that we can glean from in the gas supply and electric supply model. Those are emissions and portfolio costs. We know we can pull out that quantitative information, and so we think it's best to just call that out here as we think about equity considerations in the ISP modeling. Okay, one more click. On the distribution system planning, there's sort of two different areas we're thinking about here. One is we use what are called customer benefit indicators or CBIs to sort of optimize the list, the portfolio, the group of projects that are established in the electric distribution system. And so we're able to not necessarily measure the magnitude of these CBIs, but essentially understand uh, is there an effect on any of these CBIs for each of the different projects? Again, this is all used to optimize and come up with that full list. And here we see we're using those CBIs to make that list of projects. The other piece that we are mindful of is we're thinking about the amount of capital investment distributed to named communities. So looking at a total list of potential projects and asking ourselves, what do we think the level of capital investment would be specifically in named communities? And we think that this is something that's really helpful to be mindful of as we think about equity considerations here in the modeling side. Okay, one more on distributional. Okay, on the transmission side, this is one where we've really had to think about what are we doing in our planning model, and the area that sticks out is reliability, where we are able to assess reliability, really able to understand any of the voltage concerns that are happening in the system, and measuring that as a part of developing a list of transmission projects. Now, this is an area that we are continuing to evolve and continuing to understand where we can further our understanding of equity considerations in the transmission side. Again, much like a lot of the other segments, these are using some of the sort of generic resources where we're really forecasting and don't have the level of specificity rather to dive deep into the true impacts, if you will, of a particular area. Okay, if we'll click to one more, and this should be the procedural bucket. Now, Uche touched on this earlier today, where she really went through the number of touch points we had in terms of outreach and engagement with this group, with EAG, with customers, to really get to this point in terms of the modeling. That's what is reflected here, that we continue to have those different outreach and engagement touch points. And then obviously overall as an integrated system plan, we're continuing to meet with this group, EAG and others as well, as we move forward here. So just noting that we continue to be very mindful and thoughtful about when we have these connections with customers, with advisory groups moving throughout the ISP. Now, I'll pause here for questions, but I do want to mention that the second part of this presentation is actually to dive deeper into each of these planning groups, some of the technical aspects of each of these planning groups, but I'm happy to answer any question.
Thanks, Brian. And I see Ferlin's hand.
Yeah,
Ferlin.
go ahead for it.
Oh, hi, Brian.
Hi, Troy.
So there seems to be a good amount of effort in trying to get some data, either quantitative or qualitative, across different aspects of this wheel, of this
Mhm.
planning wheel. Um, Are there, I didn't hear explicit sort of naming of thinking about energy burden or how much are people spending in their bills, which is, kind of a really important sort of economic equity consideration. And I know that, when we're trying to quantify things don't have the same units, right? Like a project might reduce emissions, might improve air quality, or might improve energy burden numbers. How do we compare this? Do you have a tool, or are you developing this tool? Is this part of this equity analysis pilot to sort of put on the same basis these kind of projects? How is this project affecting energy burden, quality, air quality, emissions, etc.? And then, how do we making decisions on what projects are the best projects? Since obviously you don't have infinite money, how
Mhm.
do we put that money to work with the best best outcomes possible. Is there, could we hear more about that?
Yeah, happy to, Freud. Thank you for the question. Jack, can we go to the next slide? And I want to go to the next slide because I think this helps me sort of answer the question. So, for I think what you're touching on is some of the discussion we would have later on once we get into the decision framework, even towards the outcomes and actions. And the reason I say that is because when you think about sort of the costs and everything, we don't have the costs right now. We're just sort of setting up the model. But I think later on, once we're able to analyze each of the different scenarios and at a portfolio level, understand, okay, what is the cost implication? What is the bill impact from each of these portfolios? How will it impact customers? That will really come along once we get to the decision framework later on. So I think right now we're just at the very macro level where we're not able to really understand those sort of bill impacts, not yet, but that'll come later on after we've analyzed some of the scenarios at a portfolio level and see them sort of holistically. Does that
Yeah, I
is
mean,
that helpful for you?
I wanted to a quick follow-up. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you're right. What I'm thinking about is more
Hmm.
decision making part. But thinking about it like from right now might allow us to pinpoint what are the variables that we should be tracking, right? And this is in the analysis. What should we be analyzing? So what are the metrics that are of interest, such that when we come to decision making, we have them, and not get to the decision making saying, "Oh, actually, we should have been listening. We should have been getting that number."
Yep.
So it's like I understand that I'm talking about a little bit in the future, but what we want in the future, we need to be preparing for it like right now.
Yes, and I hear what you're saying, Freud. And one example I can think of is incentives. So if we understood the amount of incentives that customers may receive from different types of customer programs, that might be some great data to have later on as we think about bill impacts or costs or anything like that. And that's something we're starting to develop sort of early on to the process. And so to your point, Freud, maybe that's one of the metrics we could just be sure we put a pin in it and say, okay, let's come back to this and use that later on in the decision framework. Does that sort of get to what you're thinking of? Or, and I would also, Freud, if you've got some suggestions on some things that you're thinking of that we could probably pin to the board as we move through this process.
I come to this question with some experience. Yeah, I
Okay.
developed this model to have it's like an optimization model that takes into account energy burden reductions and carbon emission reductions, and with given a portfolio of options, what is the best portfolio that best reduces energy bills and carbon emissions in the state of Washington, given that we had some money for community energy projects in the state. Obviously, this is a slightly different problem, but it is kind of a similar way of thinking of how are we quantifying benefits and how do we maximize benefits. But I think that the approach could be translated to the specific case if we could work together.
Sure, for sure. Thanks for that, Freud.
And sorry, Lauren, thank you for your patience.
Thanks for that back and forth. And yes, I see Lauren's hand up.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you guys are thinking about this in terms of like a phased, consideration, like, looking at the modeling and analysis and then the decision framework and then kind of assessing the outcomes and actions after that. I think that makes sense to me. One thing that is on my mind is, the UTC has this ongoing equity policy docket. There's like a big workshop tomorrow, and there's been a lot of kind of discussions and comments and things happening there. And I'm wondering if you guys have given any thought to like how, whether or not there's policy guidance issued in that docket, how you're thinking about maybe incorporating some of the learnings that are happening in that space here. Is it going to be timely for like, the Q3 2026 decision making? Or what do you, maybe this is just a question about what do you know about that docket and how are you thinking about it in this context?
Yeah, we're fully aware of the docket, and we have a full energy equity team who is on point to stay really connected with the docket. I'm anxious to see what the conversation is like tomorrow. I think there may be some learnings from the conversation as UTC moves through that docket that we could potentially use for the ISP, but I think we just want to be thoughtful about what amount of information we can use and sort of implement in this phase, as opposed to some of the other phases, and kind of see how things mature over time. So long-winded to say, Lord, we're kind of waiting to see what the docket says, what the policy statement may be, and trying to figure out ways to really integrate.
Thanks, Brian. And then Jamie, I saw your question. Lauren, can you link the UTC proceeding tomorrow that you just mentioned? And then Quinn, thanks for putting that in the chat.
Thanks. I had another question though, Annie.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead, Jamie.
So I was in a different forum just yesterday, I think. We're discussing like, I don't know if the right word is, never should use the word retroactive when it comes to utility commissions, but like backwards looking and proactive looking cost allocation and revenue allocation based on cost responsibility versus benefits. And, just as an economist, like we're always, from very early times, like learning about gains to trade and, anything between, the cost to produce something versus the, potential social or incremental benefit. Anywhere in between there is some sort of gain or value that can be shared. But that doesn't really incorporate budget constraints holistically. And so, you might have different customers and different groups of folks that have varying levels of benefits, but even, with particular infrastructure investments and programs. But, I just know this in my household that because of affordability, that some things that may actually have benefits are just deferred and delayed in planning of our life and stuff like that. And so I think about the different customer groups, and as the utility moves forward and making looking at equity, the question of benefits to customers, even if customers may benefit from some action or investment from the utility, the question of like whether that's necessary for that particular group is a different question. And so cost responsibility and planning around, at least incorporating not just, obviously not just benefits, but looking at that from a lens with ability to pay along with benefits and costs. Because I think affordability is top of mind for a lot of folks.
Thank you for that question and comment, Jamie. I would agree. Affordability is at the top. That's what we've seen in some of the surveys and things we've done. Going back to the EAG, Dennis, I don't know if you're okay to talk about, but we talk about affordability in the EAG. And so Dennis, I don't know if you want to add some context of sort of what you all are seeing from the EAG standpoint.
Sure. Actually, there are actually more things. And from the EAG's perspective, we're looking at actually affordability, accessibility, accountability, and advocacy. And the affordability obviously is, are these services from EAG affordable for the folks that are in the named communities? And really, and that also kind of ties back again to the analysis of median income and also federal poverty level and burden. So we have a number of metrics that are being used to help direct us to those populations and also to where those populations are. Accessibility really looks at a couple things. It's, obviously accessibility, to the services where you have the other population, but also accessibility to programs. There are a series of customer assistance programs that touch on many things. And, accessibility to those programs is a major part of the outreach that Brian was talking about. Accountability really kind of gets back into is PSC and its systems accountable to what's put forth in CETA and the CEIP and the the UTC and other policies and directives that PSC needs to adhere to. And the last really gets into the advocacy, which we're looking at, and that really is the effort by PSC to proactively move forward and enact elements within the restorative quadrant that help correct and make right some of the issues that we're finding within the system, or even proactive to the point where we see them coming and PSC can actually take actions to prevent them from taking place ultimately. So, but yeah, I mean, all of those elements are, a lot of them have a lot of the qualitative measures, but a lot of them are quantitative with the data that's been used to characterize the various communities and situations that, we've looked at over the last 5 years. Ryan?
Thanks for that, Dennis. I really appreciate you jumping on that in there because I know affordability was a key piece of a lot of the conversation we've had in the EAG. And so, Jamie, hopefully that helps provide a little more context to the question, the point you raised. But happy to chat a little bit more about that if not.
Brian?
Can I?
Did you have some, Dennis or Jamie?
Yeah, this is Dennis. I just wanted to answer. I know that Quinn had asked earlier, and when you think about the affordability piece, yeah, those key metrics come up, but also they came up in that survey, and the EAG read through that survey and saw that, and that was really one of the number one within that survey, one of the number one items that those folks responded to. So obviously, we realize that the folks that, that conducted or that completed that survey are looking for action in that area. And again, PSC through EAG and LIAC and Craig are also focusing in on that deliverable.
So,
Thank you,
thank
Dennis.
you. I just want to follow up, and we can take obviously so many things offline, and I'm happy to as well. I just want to put something concrete in terms of what I was trying to express. And I'm thinking about, from all my days of utility commissions and consumer advocacy, one of the things that would be emblematic of this, not specific to this issue, are things like smart meters, AMI, and this question of what a minimum size meter is meant to serve, individual either households or whatever. And as obviously more sophisticated customers benefit from more sophisticated meters, but that may be like a theoretical benefit to lots of customers. But once those are installed throughout the system, the affordability of the system is an existing system. But looking ahead of time, the benefit that's needed for the customers that aren't that sophisticated, and I mean, Walmart is very sophisticated and we utilize that data, but doesn't have the symmetric benefit across customer classes, and that affects affordability. And then more recently, I'll just say that, for system infrastructure, automatic reclosures, those kind of things benefit a lot of customers like us with, very sophisticated computerized equipment. Their customers may not need that. Those bring costs into the system. And we know that a lot of these kind of investments have benefits, but depending on the sophistication or whatever of your customer group or your individual needs, that's kind of what I mean in terms of discerning what's needed versus beneficial for different customers, and then how we deal with those types of, not specific to those particular examples, but just examples of how disparate impacts might be beneficial to all customer groups, but not necessarily needed.
Thank you for that follow, Jamie. So as I understand, what I think I hear you saying is different investments have different benefits for different customers, and that is something we have to be mindful of as we develop this ISP. I appreciate you using the example of the smart meters or even reclosers, right? Because another one I can think of is if it's a microgrid or a battery stored in a particular area, right? There may be a benefit if storage or solar is on a particular commercial building. Do we also attribute that benefit to customers in the surrounding area who may be
Exactly.
on a similar system, right? Um,
Exactly. And
okay.
even things like power quality versus
Mm,
interruptions, like we care about power quality down to a very minute level, and other folks may not to the same extent that we didn't 5 years ago when we didn't have so many automated systems. So I'm just thinking about these type of investments for reliability, for data science, for knowledge, all the things that we are all moving towards, and they do have real benefits. And even if they are beneficial to all the customer groups, that question of like, if I am a household and I had the choice to spend an extra $10 a month, yeah, maybe there's a benefit, but actually I'm going to spend it to like put away for my kids' college or whatever. Like we're all making
right.
different decisions. So yeah, I
That's right.
appreciate that example as well. Thank you. And obviously it's just, this is what we're here for, is just to talk about these things, to put everything in front of mind for each of us.
Absolutely, James. That's exactly that. I thank you so much for bringing that up. That is the struggle, the challenge, if you will, of understanding benefit, who receives what magnitude, and really trying to lay that out in a way that is understandable, that, it's already somewhat complex, but just trying to lay that out in a way that gives us a picture of, okay, if we do this thing, benefits here, some benefits here, maybe a little bit benefits here, but that is the sort of the challenge here, Jamie. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. Well, thank you for that very rich exchange. I do want to just check to see if there are any other kind of last items, or Brian or Uche, did you have any last items to cover on this before we move into a quick break?
I don't. I feel like this was a really rich conversation, and I actually think we got to some of the points we wanted to make here upon the EAG reflections. I know Dennis made a number of points, and we talked earlier about some of the things we heard from the EAG. So I'm okay at this point if we want to take a break, unless there's some other questions. Oh, yep, Quinn.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you be able to provide like a transcript of what the EAG feedback was for the RPAG members?
I'm probably gonna have to phone a friend for that.
We can certainly do the meeting summary and materials and everything from that, and that should get you what you need.
Great. Great. We'll flag that as an action item. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, yeah, thank you so much for that conversation. What we'll do is go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 2:10, and then we will keep going. Please get yourself a stretch, some water, what have you, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Hey, welcome back to the October RPAG meeting with PSE. And we are going to keep going. Hopefully, you got a moment to grab some water. And we have had some really great conversations so far. We are a little bit behind schedule, so hoping I can kind of push us to make up for it in the second half. Need to be ending by 3. So if you can go to the next slide, Jack. We're going to be talking about equity considerations and resource planning, modeling, analysis next. And to take us through that, Brian Tyson is back to help us. So Brian, over to you.
Okay. So now we want to go through each of those. You remember the graphic. We want to go through each of those different buckets and have a bit of a conversation deeper on those equity considerations within the model. Like I said, I've got a team behind me here to just sort of help support me as we go through this. But if we can go to the next slide, we're going to start with the load forecast, both on the gas and electric side. And what we're trying to show here is how the load forecast model, how we believe it considers equity in these different areas as we set up the initial model. So one of the areas is just an incorporation of some of the electrification, some of the demand side resources, and considering their equity goals as well. And what I mean by that is the load forecast adjusts based on the amount of electrification, the amount of demand side resources that may be implemented throughout the years. And some of those demand side resources are thinking about some of the equity goals that are applied there as well. The other piece I touched on earlier was about temperature impacts related to climate change. And as I mentioned before, those impacts, that underlying basis is then used for all the different teams. And then the final piece is really considering customer by class. And here we're thinking about sort of back to the conversation, Jamie, we were having, which is we're really thinking about residential, commercial, and industrial in terms of those customer classes, and being able to see that in the load forecast. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, let's talk about delivery system, both from the gas and electric side. So I mentioned this earlier, but we use the list of customer benefit indicators, CBIs. We use that list to really optimize the level of projects and programs that are in that particular model. And again, it's about the amount of CBIs that are addressed within each project, as opposed to being able to say the magnitude that a project may be impacted by a customer benefit indicator. The other piece that we think about is thinking about the capital investment. So really understanding in this list of projects on the electric side, what is the dollar amount that's being invested and where is it being invested? Is it in a named community? Is it other places within our service territory? And really understanding that at a really high level. I mentioned this earlier, but part of the recognition piece is understanding where those projects are going to be versus where specific communities may be in our service territory. So having that map to really overlay and understand where customers may be impacted and may be impacted in terms of receiving a greater benefit. Now, one of the things I'll call out here is that this is how we think we can consider equity in the modeling stage. It doesn't mean we stop there, right? We will continue to think about equity considerations as we get into the project planning, as we get into the building, as we get into deeper understanding of the routing and things like that. And it's the same for the transmission. I'll mention that later. But understand that because we don't always have those specific details right now at this level, we'll continue to think about that later on. Okay, next slide. The resource planning. Here we go. Yes. So on the energy supply side, this is both the gas and electric. We wanted to think about what are the inputs and outputs of our planning model that we can really pull out that relate to some of the equitable distribution and benefits. The two areas that we really thought about are emissions and portfolio costs. And there's a lot tied to both the costs and the emissions, where you think about the Climate Commitment Act allowance costs, we think about the social costs of greenhouse gas, but understanding those costs at a portfolio level, we think will just give us an indication of the equitable consideration and distribution of benefits. And then, of course, the emissions in metric tons. So we can look at each scenario, we can understand in the model how the amount of metric tons being emitted for each of these. I also want to note that the planning model, this particular model, really brings in some of the considerations from that delivery team I talked about, the transmission and customer team I'll talk about later as well. Meaning this planning model will take in that customer side, that delivery system side in terms of the level of investment, in terms of the amounts. It will bring that into the model here as well. And so really, again, you're taking those considerations and using those as you get into this model as well. The emissions, Quit, if I can answer your question in the chat, you asked, is the emissions impact localized? The emissions impact we're seeing here are for the full portfolio. So we're not able to say specifically in this area. That's not how we're looking at it. We're looking at it, what is the total emissions from the model, which would encompass all of the stack of resource, the portfolio resources rather. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, transmission. I talked about transmission earlier. This is one where, again, going back to reliability, because that is the heart of what happens in transmission planning, is to understand when you have those voltage constraints on the system. And so reliability is something that has come up a number of times as it relates to equitable distribution of benefits. But again, here on the transmission side, it's really at a high level. You're not able to fully see the localized benefit, but really thinking about the portfolio, the energy system rather, of our service territory and making sure that it maintains that reliability. Now, this is an area where we are continuing to seek ways to expand equity considerations. We know that we have to continue to think about internally and how we want to continue to monitor these equity considerations. And I would also say, as the transmission planning process move forward, meaning as we get actual projects, as we come up with route locations, that's when you really start to see an uptick on the procedural side, where we start to have those conversations with those specific communities where we may build or may look at different areas for routing for transmission projects. So again, it really touches on the reliability side now, but when you think about the decision framework, the outcomes and actions later on, that's when we are able to get a better understanding of the equitable distribution of benefits. Okay, let's go to the next one. I think this might be the last one. And so this is a customer strategy side. And so you can see there's a number of different areas we're trying to consider equity on the customer strategy side. I'll start with the energy efficiency and demand response side, which a lot of these efforts come from the conservation potential assessment, the CPA. Where in that CPA, we're able to understand tax incentives. We're also able to break out the demand side potential, and we may be able to do that specifically for vulnerable populations, such as income eligible populations. So we're able to understand what is the amount of particular energy efficiency potential, and what does that amount look like in various customer segments and vulnerable populations. The other piece I mentioned earlier was about those non-energy impacts. And so when we come together to optimize the energy efficiency stack to really understand the widgets, we are looking at those non-energy impacts: public health, safety, comfort, productivity. Those individual metrics, if you will, are used to help us to understand what is that broad range of portfolios going to look like? The other piece I'll touch on is potential savings. Sorry, I was losing my spot here on the slide. The other piece is potential savings. So we're able to understand what are those potential energy savings for customers in named communities, and also thinking about the incentives. And if we talked earlier about incentives, but really trying to understand what do we think a level of incentives could be for customers in low and for low income customers rather. Now, again, we may not know the specific details right now, but we're really trying to grasp an understanding and forecast of what is used here.
And
And
hey,
then, oh yeah, go ahead, Annie. Sorry. A
oh,
lot of
did you see the
questions.
questions in the chat?
Um,
I can read those out loud for you.
yes.
Okay, just was curious if that's where you were going
Oh,
next. So I can go
uh,
to, oh, go ahead.
yeah. Yes, I was gonna say, so Quinn, your question, are NEIs going to be used for more than just conservation? Thanks for that question, Quinn. Casey's here. Ooh, I bet Casey has a really good response on this.
Yeah, build me up. I can only disappoint that way. Hi, this is Casey Curtis from Puget Sound Energy. I work in conservation and demand response, and I'm working on our contribution to the ISP. The NEIs are, if you count social cost of greenhouse gas as a non-energy impact, then we do use it for more than just conservation. We use it all throughout our portfolio. A lot of the NEIs that you might be familiar with such as thermal comfort or O&M savings, things like that. Those are primarily found in conservation. The other question was from Megan Larkin, I believe, is how are non-energy impacts determined or calculated? That's a very complicated question with a complicated answer, but just to give you some background, in 2021, Puget Sound Energy invested in a study that looked across multiple jurisdictions across North America and determined what utilities were using for impacts, what sort of studies had been done, and then we adopted those for our conservation portfolio. And so depending on the non-energy impact, there's usually some sort of study, there with something like, say, thermal comfort, there might be something like ranked choice surveys or things like that that sort of help determine where customers are at in terms of their, what it's worth to them, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks for jumping in on that. Um, and Megan, yes, please let us know if you want any follow-up on that. And Quinn, see your hand.
Yeah, I am kind of curious about to what extent PSE will be doing distributed equity analysis on the entire portfolio of DERs, distributed energy resources. Because I know that was a point of contention with regard to like some of the pilots only having them and only a certain amount.
That's right. Yeah, thanks for that, Quinn. And that's what we found in our research is that the DEAs are really effective when you have a program that is stood up, long-standing, and you're able to analyze some of those distributional impacts, as opposed to looking at a portfolio of programs that may not be stood up yet. But I welcome any other response if anyone else from PSE wants to jump in. If not, that's okay.
And while you're waiting for that, Brian, I'll just acknowledge Megan. I see that you said you'd love some more information and a follow-up, so we'll make sure to capture that as an action item as well.
Well, thank you, Megan. And Froy, I saw your comment about NEIs being monetized, and it looks like you had a link to some LBNL research there.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
LBNL has some research on, benefits of clean energy, what is the appropriate or what is an acceptable value for the air quality benefits that a customer or that a residential customer might get from the greening of the grid, for example, or in this case, electrifying residential space and water heating. They have a bunch of different research reports where they try to put a value on these benefits, on these services, or in this reduce stress to the health system. What is the value of greening the grid? And obviously, just like Casey said, yeah, these values are not necessarily universally accepted, right? Not everybody thinks that reducing a death in a population is X number of dollars, but so they have some assumptions there. But I think it's a place to start, and it's a place that I've been working from in order to try to co-optimize, resident community energy systems that take into account reductions in pollution.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Froylan. I will take a look at this. We're always on the lookout for new studies. Some of this looks like it covers areas that we include. So, for instance, we have a non-energy impact that calculates the cost to public health facilities from the reductions in PM 2.5, reductions from indoor air penetration, or pollutant penetration from air sealing, things like that. So, but I would happily take a look at this. I appreciate you pointing it out.
Thanks that for I appreciate that. My last comment was here on the bottom on DERs, and Quinn actually sort of noted this where we're thinking of how can we use our learnings from that DEA pilot analysis to really be used in the modeling for equity considerations. And similar to the energy efficiency side, we're really trying to think about the incentives from different programs in our modeling that may prioritize named communities, in particular, uh, low income customers as well. So trying to understand what that amount of incentive is for various DER programs that could be out there. Okay. Annie, I think that was my last slide.
Okay. Well, great. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate that, sharing all your expertise and answering questions. Folks, any last things before we wrap up? We can go to the next slide, Jack. Okay. Next slide after that is fine. Okay. Well, great. We've got a couple follow-up items, so we'll make sure to note those. Oh, yes, Quinn.
Sorry, I keep fumbling with things to like make notes and
It's
pull
okay.
information up as I go. But I'm kind of curious about how PSE is kind of breeding the idea that they have some mandates within what's now our CW 8086 for certain achievements like energy efficiency and demand response with like some of these equity strategies, as well as obviously the decision framework is mentioned, and we've sort of talked about things like monetization of benefits and cost that might go into the cost test. And so I'm kind of curious at what stage is that being looked at or developed at this point?
And
Sorry,
Quinn, can you
kind of a
remind me what
two-parter.
was oh, sorry, I was going to ask, did you say 8086? Can you repeat that one again?
Yeah, that's just the codified version of House Bill 1589. So it's RCW 8086.
Okay. So Quinn, just so I can understand your question there, and you're asking how are we considering the items in 8086 as it relates to our equity considerations? Maybe that was too narrow, but
Yeah, that's precisely what I was getting at.
okay. Well, I think at a high level, that is sort of what we're trying to do here. And the way I look at 8086 is really bringing together our gas and our electric and our distribution and transmission and bringing all those planning pieces together to really think about how do we plan those together, iterate together. But now this is what we're trying to show is that, well, we've got to think about equity considerations in each of these different buckets, right? Where before where it was CETA, we were really focused on the electric supply side and some of the demand side resources as well. But here, Quinn, what I'm hoping we're doing is we're actually looking at, well, what are we doing on the gas supply side? What are we doing on the distribution and transmission side? And bringing those pieces to fruition, to front and center, so that we're able to understand the equity consideration, all these different components of the ISP. Uh, so hopefully that helps, Quinn. But if not, please let me know. I want to be sure I'm answering your question here.
Yeah, that was great, and we'll continue to talk about that in the future, I'm sure of it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Quinn.
Okay, great. Well, I'm not seeing other questions in the chat, but thanks everyone for tossing information around. Love to see that collaboration and sharing. That's what this group's all about. So if there's nothing else, I think I'll go ahead and move into next steps. We've got a couple action items which will be highlighted in the meeting summary. Just want to again thank our presenters and folks that helped answer questions being here today. Super helpful to have all the great minds together thinking in the same room and going back and forth. So you can go to the next slide. And now we're going to move, and before we move into the feedback process, Ben, I think it would be great if you could just see who of the attendees, the public observers, might want to make public comment. And if you could just coordinate, I think you just have to allow them to raise their hand. And if you'd like to, oh, we can see your screen, Jack. If you can just go back to the presentation. There you go. But Ben, if you could go ahead and just, I see that there's at least one hand up, and go ahead and move those folks to the, or at least that person to the panelists. And it looks like Dawn, yeah, and Dawn knows how to do that. So shouldn't be a problem there. So while he's doing that, I'll go ahead and go through the last slides. Jack, feel free to share your screen if you can. If you can't, no worries, I'll just explain it. There's a feedback process slide that really just helps to provide some clarity on how all of your feedback during these RPAG meetings is used in the process. So PSE had this visual introduced, the one that's in your slides, that's off screen right now, a few meetings back. Is probably over the summertime now. And we like to bring it back at each meeting just to show you the whole feedback flow, how input from the RPAG is used, the Equity Advisory Group or the EAG, like we've been talking a lot about today, and the public is gathered before, during, and after each meeting. And whether that's shared in discussion or submitted in writing, all input is reviewed and summarized and put into inform some of the planning decisions, including the ISP, the integrated system plan. So we hope the visual in the packet of materials that you have is helpful and helps you see that transparent process. Another great thing to do is just visit the Puget Sound Energy website, and I'm sure Ben can put that link into the chat, specifically for the Resource Planning Advisory Group. We've got every meeting in there ready to go, with meeting agenda, materials, links to recordings if they're already in the past or have just occurred. It might take a few days, but or a few weeks, but other than that, they should be there. And then we'll go to the upcoming activities on the slide. I think you might be at the next slide after this. Or the slide before that. Maybe go one more before. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so November 6th, we've got the feedback for this meeting closes. We've got the next RPAG meeting and the last one of 2025, focused on iterative analysis. It's going to be on November 13th. So that we won't be having one in December, as you can see here, just to give you that holiday break. And then we will also have 2 public webinars on November 18th, one during lunchtime and one after typical working hours in the evening, to try to get both folks' demographics in terms of working during the day or not working during the day. And that will be focused on customer priorities for a clean energy future. So hopefully those are on your calendar. If not, please go ahead and add those. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and these are all the ways you can contact PSE. So we've got an email address here. We have a feedback form. You can leave them a voicemail. Also, you can subscribe to their email list, or you can visit their website, and we can go ahead and put those in the chat for you. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're going to move into the public comment section. You can go to the next slide after that. So let's see, we already did the hand up, so it looks like we just have one person. Is that right, Ben? Just Dawn today?
That's great.
Okay, great. So, hey, Dawn, I don't think you're a stranger to this. I know you've made comments a couple times before. So just, typical stuff here. Ask that you stay respectful and focus on the topics that were covered today. And although we know we're not going to be answering any questions you might have, that information and your input is going to be put into the feedback summary. And we've got plenty of time, but if you can please stick to the 3 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll go ahead and give you a warning when you're getting close or when we've hit time. And if we run out of time and you still have additional thoughts, please go ahead and put those in writing to the email address you see up there. Okay. So, Dawn, are you able to show yourself on screen?
I think I should be there. Can you see me?
I have to probably scroll around here. There's a lot of people here today.
You can see you.
Great. Somebody can see you. So it sounds like you're good. Okay. And I'll go ahead and start the timer and I'll give you 3 minutes. Please go ahead and begin. I'll get your timing started.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm Don Marsh. I'm representing Sierra Club and the Washington Clean Energy Coalition. I would like to comment on slide 14, which focused on temperature and climate change as the primary equity issues connected to the demand forecast. We think there are other issues to consider. In a recent RPAG meeting, PSE provided a graph that forecasts the main drivers of electric demand over the next 20 years. In that graph, demand from data centers and demand from building electrification were almost non-existent. If these sources of electric demand are underestimated, it could have major impacts on both distributional and restorative justice for named communities. For example, if significant demand from new data centers materializes, it is likely to have negative impacts on non-urban communities. New demands from data centers has already been shown to raise costs, increase air and noise pollution, and reduce reliability. The customers who would be saddled with these impacts aren't the same as the customers who benefit from data center services. A recent study by Rewiring America shows how incentives for solar panels, batteries, and heat pumps could help named communities reduce their energy costs, improve reliability, and free up resources for use by data centers. PSE can play a productive role in this process. A good step would be to better support building electrification, especially for named communities. I also want to mention reliability. Named communities often face a double challenge. First, PSE invests in redundancy and smart grid enhancements where there are critical services like hospitals and fire stations and large companies. If a customer lives some distance from these services, their grid services may be less resilient. When a storm hits, PSE prioritizes restoration of power to the areas that have critical services, so named communities are often restored later. There might be good arguments for this prioritization, but it is the opposite of equity. We would like to see equity considered throughout PSE's system. Although these details may not be addressed in the ISP, this is the planning process that lays out the map and the aspirations. If they aren't considered here, these equity issues may not be prioritized in system design and emergency response. Thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments, Dawn, and thank you for staying on time. Appreciate it. Okay, I think that's all we have. Let me just make sure I exited out of that. Just good. Okay, I think I did. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move into wrap up. Just want to thank you all for being here. And Kara Durbin from PSE is going to provide us with just closing remarks.
Thank you, Annie. I really just want to thank everyone today for the thoughtful questions and engagement. My thanks on behalf of Brian and Uche and the rest of the team that really has been working hard to set up this conversation. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas. We know that considering equity in our planning process is not an easy exercise. You know, we walk through the various ways it's showing up in our planning processes that we're really bringing together for the first time in this ISP. So while it might not be easy, we know it's important work. And so we just really appreciate the thoughtful questions, the comments, the engagement. As you have thoughts, please send them to us in the feedback report. We'll be considering those, and we'll continue to move forward with this work. So thanks everybody for making time for this today.
Thanks, Kara. And one last plug for the pop-up Zoom poll that should come up as you exit the meeting today. We'd love for you to just complete that. Should just take a few minutes, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our November meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.